You can watch Laura's entire conversation with the governor online right now. They dive into more issues like oil and gas, groundwater contamination by the Air Force, and climate change. It's all online at nmpbs.org. Welcome back to our Line Opinion panelists. We have one final discussion to get to: red flag laws and a new investigation from the Associated Press that shows how little they're being used around the country, but especially here in New Mexico. Red flag laws, if you don't know, are designed to allow police officers to petition a judge to order a gun owner who poses an imminent danger to themselves or others to surrender their firearm. Now, since 2020, more than 600 people have died from gun violence in New Mexico, but our state's red flag law has been used just 8 times in that same time period. Now, Tom, starting broadly, how surprised were you to see those stats and those statistics?
It was an interesting story. Obviously the AP story provided a comparison across the country, and New Mexico had the lowest number. And I'm not, I was surprised, especially in comparison to Colorado, that was well into double digits. But, overall, it kind of reinforced my thought that New Mexico and other states in the West really have a conflict of sorts as far as, gun rights are concerned. And there, for me, it really kind of picked up an idea that perhaps, this is really a behavioral health issue as far as, how to address behavioral health that's manifesting itself as a Second Amendment issue. And, obviously, if people are going to do bad things, they're going to use anything at their disposal to do those bad things, whether it's a handgun, their own hands, a knife. So, for me, it was just more of a reflection of, how, the eastern part of the United States and the western part of the United States are really kind of grappling with this particular issue.
Right. Good point there. Your last point's a big part of the puzzle here. Kathy, a big piece of this is hesitancy from law enforcement locally who ultimately initiate this process, as you know. A lot of police here believe seizing guns could be dangerous and, frankly, unnecessary, including the head of the New Mexico Sheriff's Association, which lobbied against the state law, as you recall. How can we change that perception among law enforcement, or should we, or can we? What do you make of that, where they're at on this?
It's always difficult to legislate people's attitudes. And, their attitude probably is more in line with thinking that we need to make, gun sanctuary cities, and, that people have a right to bear arms and their Second Amendment rights are sacrosanct. But what we know is that, perhaps if we could talk to them about how our suicide rate is, one of the highest in the nation, and one of the major ways that people commit suicide is through the use of a handgun. And so if they could maybe, think about it just in terms of that, and not in terms of, we're trying to take away your guns, but we're trying to make sure that people who are in danger of at least harming themselves, that we're able to say, this is the person who should probably not legally own a firearm. And it is a behavioral health issue that manifests as a Second Amendment right. And it is, they need to just think about it in different ways and look at some of the statistics that have happened over the country to say that, the people who do have red flag laws and are using them have fewer firearm deaths.
Michael, on Kathy's point, to underscore the need for action on this, the rate of gun violence in our state is 55% higher than it was just 10 years ago. And the financial toll in the state is costing almost 5% of the state's GDP. I mean, is there anything else we need to know here before we get to some kind of solutions?
Well, I think one of the things that was referenced, was the fact that, 78% of U.S. People support red flag, and that's the public.
Right.
So I think that anyone who serves in any capacity to meet as a public servant, be they police, be they sheriffs, be they fire department, be they city government, county government, if you're in that if you've assumed that role in that profession, then you have a duty to, I think, do your best due diligence to make a commitment to providing and supporting and protecting the public,
Mm-hmm.
everyone.
Mhm.
And clearly, the behavioral health reference and substance abuse issues here in New Mexico, that's all part and parcel of it. And it just, and then we've got, our DWI accident. I mean, they're not accidents, they're, fatalities in the state.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a host of these issues, and it just, I'm not sure that we really are coming at this from a holistic perspective, because they're all they all can be somewhat interrelated and interconnected, and it really, in my mind, goes back to the family of origin. Where your parents, your grandparents, and some families, if you have a strong family, if you have a family that has a home and adequate income and all of those things, that the chances of children growing up being healthy and well adjusted are significantly greater than when you don't have that.
That's right.
And I would also say, I think that the use of guns in terms of suicide or homicide is part of that. So I mean, I don't have, I wish I was going to use a metaphor, but I can't formulate at this point, sort of what needs to be done. But it does, in my mind, always goes back to the family of origin and the community.
Right.
If you've got a strong family and you've got strong community and the support that families need to thrive and grow, you're going to have healthier outcomes for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Tom, I got to bring politics into this for a quick second here. Democratic candidate for Attorney General Raul Torres, if you think about it, won the primary on promises to expand the use of red flag laws. He's now running against nominee Jeremy Gay. Do you see this becoming a flashpoint issue in that race? I mean, could Mr. Gay make something of Mr. Torres's use of the law or non-use of it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, because you're looking at the political arena as opposed to reality.
Right, exactly.
So, from the political perspective, yeah, you can make hay out of just about anything. And I think that, and I don't have, particular, thoughts on the Attorney General's race at this particular point in time, despite the election being 2 months away. But, Mr. Jeremy Gay could actually make a case along those lines. And I think he would probably have a very strong case by saying that police officers have way too much on their plate right now. Does a red flag law really need to rest on their shoulders? Right. I mean, we were talking earlier in the show about, Albuquerque Public Schools, being told that they have to be able to monitor the Wilson Middle School Park because of lack of available police officers. And so, that's one of the things I think is we need to, as Michael and Catherine have said, we really need to take a more holistic approach as far as how the red flag laws are actually implemented. Because it is that behavioral health issue, and I don't think we've addressed that. Instead, we've addressed the tactic of saying, okay, let's take something away that somebody could use to hurt themselves or others.
That's right. Kathy, we just got about a minute here, but I want to get your take on this. There's been some newly appropriated funding being used to create a new violence prevention unit at the State Department of Health. Now, each year, recurring funds of more than $10 million will go towards munis and tribal governments for a wider range of things like gun safety, outreach, community development. That's meant to prevent future gun violence. Necessary steps, certainly, and the money sounds good, but can they work by themselves, or is there something missing you here that you'd like to see included as well?
We have a problem that money alone cannot solve. We need the money, but we also need to take that holistic approach. And what I'll say, and I guess my answer to every question that you ask me could be that instead of doing things that are transactional and discrete, we need to have transformative approaches, and that we need to combine and understand the nuances and really, as Michael was talking about, look at community environment, look at what got us to the place that we are at with gun violence being out of control.
Yep, good points there. Thanks again to our line panel as always. Now, be sure to let us know what you think about any of the topics the line covered on our Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram pages. And catch any episodes you may have missed on the PBS video app or your Roku or smart TV.